The full moon cast eerie shadows across the abandoned Coolsville Bank as the mystery machine pulled up to the curb. The air smelled of old paper and something else, ... Something metallic and strange. Scooby-Doo's nose twitched nervously as he peered through the van's window at the imposing marble building.
Like, why are we here at midnight, Fred?
Shaggy asked, clutching a half-eaten sandwich.
Couldn't this wait until, daytime?
When there's less spooky and more snacky. Fred's face was unusually tense, his signature ascot seeming tighter than usual.
I received an anonymous letter today.
It said if I wanted to know the truth about my family's money, I needed to come here tonight. Velma adjusted her glasses, studying a folder of documents she'd been researching. Fred, I've been meaning to talk to you about something I discovered. Your family's wealth? There are some inconsistencies in the public records. Large deposits with no clear source. Investments that appeared overnight ... double quotes. Rats were auspicious. Scooby barked, his ears flattening against his head. Daphne placed a reassuring hand on Fred's shoulder. Whatever we find out, we're here for you. But we should be smart about this. We can't just rush in without a plan. Suddenly, a ghostly figure appeared in the bank's window, a translucent specter wearing an old-fashioned banker's suit, its eyes glowing green as it clutched stacks of phantom money. The figure pointed directly at Fred before vanishing into the darkness. Zoinks! Shaggy yelped, dropping his sandwich.
Like, did that ghost just single out our fearless leader?
The mystery was clear. Something sinister was connected to Fred's family fortune, and tonight they would uncover whether his inheritance was built on legitimate investments or something far more dangerous. As Velma would later explain, understanding where money comes from is the first rule of financial literacy, and ignoring that rule could cost you everything. The Coolsville Community Center buzzed with activity that Saturday morning. The gang had volunteered to help organize a financial literacy fair for local families, an event teaching kids and adults about budgeting, saving, and making smart money decisions.
Okay, gang, let's split up the tasks, Fred said, consulting his clipboard.
Velma, you're running the savings versus spending booth.
Daphne, you've got the smart shopping station.
And Shaggy, Scooby, you're in charge of... Wait, where are they?
Right here.
Shaggy called from the snack table, his arms loaded with donuts, cookies, and chips.
Like, we're taste testing the refreshments to make sure they're quality controlled.
Raggy, Rookrat Riss. Scooby held up a price tag. Revan Rollers for Ronronad. Velma walked over, shaking her head with an amused smile. Shaggy, that's exactly why you're always broke by Tuesday. If you spend $7 on a donut every day, that's $49 a week, over $200 a month, just on donuts. That money could go into savings or investments.
But Velma, Shaggy protested, investments don't taste like chocolate frosting.
Daphne laughed while setting up her booth.
Actually, Shaggy, if you invested that $200 monthly with a modest 7% annual return, in 10 years, you'd have over $34,000.
That's a lot of donuts later. Fred barely heard the conversation. He stared at his phone, rereading the anonymous message from last night. Your family's fortune is built on lies. Tonight at midnight, Coolsville Bank. Come alone, or everyone will know the truth. Fred? Earth to Fred? Daphne waved her hand in front of his face. You've been distracted all morning. What's going on? Before Fred could answer, the community center doors burst open. A tall, gaunt man in an expensive suit strode in, his shoes clicking ominously on the polished floor. His cologne was overpowering, a mix of expensive leather and something chemical that made Scooby's nose wrinkle. Frederick Jones, Jr.? The man's voice was cold and formal. That's me. Fred stood up straighter, instinctively protective of his friends. The man handed Fred an envelope sealed with red wax. From the Coolsville Historical Banking Commission. You're required to appear at the old bank building tonight at midnight regarding irregularities with the Jones Family Trust Fund. Failure to appear will result in a full public investigation. The man turned and left as abruptly as he'd arrived, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Velma immediately grabbed the envelope, examining it carefully. This seal is authentic. It's the real commission letterhead. Fred, what's this about your family trust fund? Fred's face had gone pale. I don't know much about it. My parents always said the money came from smart investments my grandfather made in the 1960s. Real estate, stocks, that sort of thing. But they never gave me details. Like, maybe your grandpa was just really good at saving his allowance? Shaggy suggested hopefully. Scooby nodded enthusiastically. Ralawans. But Velma's expression was serious as she pulled out her tablet, fingers flying across the screen. I'm looking up your grandfather's financial records, the public ones anyway. Fred, your grandfather started with a modest salary as a civil engineer. But in 1965, suddenly there's a massive deposit into his account. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars worth millions today after decades of compound interest. Where did it come from? Daphne asked, moving closer to look at the screen. That's the problem, Velma frowned. The deposit is listed as private investment return, but there's no record of what he invested in or who paid him. In legitimate finance, every transaction has a paper trail. This is ... suspicious. Fred felt his world tilting. His whole life, he benefited from his family's wealth, the nice house, the mystery machine, the ability to travel solving mysteries instead of working a regular job. Had it all been built on something criminal? We have to go tonight, Fred said firmly. I need to know the truth. Then we're all going, Daphne insisted. Mystery Inc. Sticks together. Rexcept when rare's a roast, Scooby added. As the fair continued around them, none of them noticed the shadowy figure watching from the community center as second-floor balcony, a figure that disappeared the moment Velma looked up, leaving only the faint smell of old paper and decay. What secrets awaited them at the Coolsville Bank? And what did Fred's family fortune have to do with the ghostly banker? The old Coolsville Bank loomed before them like a monument to forgotten secrets. Built in 1923, its neoclassical architecture featured towering marble columns and ornate brass fixtures that had long since tarnished green with age. The building had been closed for 15 years after the bank merged with a larger institution, leaving this historic structure abandoned officially, at least. The architecture is actually quite beautiful, Daphne observed, taking photos with her phone. But there's something sad about it. Like a grand old lady forgotten by time, Velma consulted her research on her tablet. Coolsville Bank was once the most prestigious financial institution in 3 counties. It survived the Great Depression by maintaining conservative lending practices and transparent accounting. Ironically, it's remembered for its integrity, which makes this mystery even more puzzling. Like, can we remember it from outside? Shaggy suggested, his knees knocking together audibly. Preferably from very far outside, like maybe from another state? Rompy roll rimp, raggy, Scooby said, though his own tail was tucked firmly between his legs. Fred checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. We're early. Let's look around the perimeter before we go in. There might be clues about who sent that letter. The gang split up, with Fred and Daphne circling left while Velma supervised Shaggy and Scooby going right. The night air was crisp with autumn cold, carrying the scent of dead leaves and distant rain. Fred, Daphne said softly as they walked, whatever we find tonight, it doesn't change who you are. You're the bravest, most loyal person I know. Your character isn't determined by your family's past. It's determined by your choices. Fred managed a weak smile. Thanks, Daph. But what if my whole life has been funded by something terrible? What if my grandfather was a criminal? Then we deal with it honestly, Daphne replied firmly. That's what financial responsibility actually means, facing the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Velma taught me that when she helped me understand my own family's spending problems. Meanwhile,
On the other side of the building, Scooby had discovered something. Velma, look. He pointed his paw at the ground near a side entrance. Fresh footprints in the mud recent, within the last hour, led directly into the building through a door that hung slightly ajar. Velma crouched down, examining the prints with her flashlight. Size 11 shoes, expensive leather soles based on the tread pattern. And look at this. She pointed to a second set of prints, smaller and accompanied by drag marks. Someone else was here, and they were walking voluntarily. Zoinks! Like, you mean someone was kidnapped? Shaggy's voice went up an octave. Or coerced, Velma corrected. Either way, we're not alone here tonight. And whoever made these prints had money. Those shoes cost at least $500. She pulled out her phone to call the police, but there was no signal. That's odd. I had full bars in the parking lot. Ramming! Scooby sniffed the air urgently. Something's ramming the rignal. Before they could investigate further, Fred and Daphne came running around the corner. We found something, Fred said breathlessly. He held up a torn piece of paper. It was nailed to the back door. Look. Velma shone her light on the paper. It was a photocopy of an old ledger page from 1965, with one entry circled in red ink. Jones, Edward, $250,000. Project Counterfeit Eagle. Paid in full. Project Counterfeit Eagle? Daphne read aloud. That sounds like a counterfeiting operation, Velma finished grimly. The eagle was slang for the old $10 bill, which featured an eagle on the back before the 1963 redesign. Fred, this suggests your grandfather was paid $250,000 for involvement in counterfeiting money. Fred felt sick. No, there has to be another explanation. My grandfather was an honest man, everyone said so. Like, maybe he was paid to stop the counterfeiting? Shaggy suggested hopefully. You know, like a reward? That's actually a valid point, Velma admitted. Law enforcement did pay informants. But why would this be hidden? And why threaten Fred about it now, 60 years later? A church bell in the distance began to toll midnight. As the 12th chime echoed across the empty streets, the bank's massive front doors slowly creaked open from the inside, though no one was visible pushing them. Green light spilled out onto the marble steps, accompanied by the sound of an old adding machine clacking away ching like mechanical laughter. Then came the voice hollow, echoing, and filled with malice. Frederick Jones, Jr., your family's debt is due. Tonight you pay for your grandfather's sins. The ghostly banker materialized in the doorway, taller than before, its eyes burning with supernatural fire. It held up a glowing ledger, pages flipping wildly in an impossible wind. Each page showed the same entry. Jones guilty, Jonesgui, Jones guilty. Joinks. Like, maybe we should reschedule this whole confronting family secrets thing. Shaggy grabbed Scooby and turned to run. But Velma caught his arm. Wait. Look at the ghost's appearance carefully. The suit is from the 1960s. Yes. But look at the fabric quality. That's modern polyester, not the wool they used back then. And those glowing eyes? That's LED technology, probably controlled remotely. You mean it's fake? Fred asked, hope rising in his voice. The ghost is definitely fake, Velma confirmed. But the mystery is real. Someone went to a lot of trouble to scare you, Fred. The question is why and what they're really after. Daphne pulled out her phone to try recording the ghost, but it flickered and died. My battery was full 5 minutes ago. Electromagnetic interference, Velma observed. Someone's using a portable signal jammer. That explains the phone issues. This is sophisticated equipment, expensive. Whoever's behind this has significant resources. The ghost raised its arms, and suddenly the bank's exterior lights blazed to life in a shower of sparks, illuminating dozens of old wanted posters plastered across the building's facade, all showing Edward Jones, Fred's grandfather, with counterfeiter written across them. No, Fred shouted.
My grandfather wasn't a criminal? Then we prove it, Velma said firmly. Inside that bank are the real records, the complete story, not just the parts someone wants us to see. Understanding financial history is like following any paper trail. You need all the documents, not just the suspicious ones. Roy, Scooby whimpered, looking at the open doors and the ghostly figure beckoning them inside. But as they hesitated, something even more disturbing happened. Behind them, in the parking lot, the Mystery Machine's lights flashed 3 times, and then the van's horn blared. When they turned to look, a message had been spray-painted across the windshield in glowing green paint. Come alone, or the truth destroys you all. Like, I don't suppose we could just email our questions instead? Shaggy suggested weakly. What secrets were hidden in the bank's vault? And who was watching their every move? Against their better judgment, and Shaggy's very vocal protests, the gang entered the Coolsville Bank. The interior was a time capsule. Marble floors still gleamed despite years of neglect. Brass teller windows stood at attention like soldiers, and the air tasted of dust, old ink, and something else, ... Something acrid that made Velma's nose wrinkle. That smell, she murmured, testing the air. It's chemicals. Specifically, the kind used in sophisticated printing operations. The ghostly banker had vanished the moment they crossed the threshold, but evidence of its presence remained. Glowing footprints created by luminescent paint, Velma quickly determined led deeper into the bank, toward the vault in the back. This is a trap, Daphne stated flatly. Someone wants us to follow that path. The question is whether we're walking into danger or toward answers. Ranger, Scooby agreed emphatically. Fred's jaw was set with determination. I need to know the truth, but everyone else should wait here. This is my family's problem. Absolutely not, Daphne said firmly. Mystery Inc. doesn't abandon friends. Besides, from a practical standpoint, we have different skills. Velma understands financial records. I can spot forged documents from my art history classes, and Shaggy and Scooby are excellent at finding secret passages while running away from monsters. Shaggy finished proudly. They moved as a group, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The bank's interior told stories of its former glory. Polished mahogany desks, vintage typewriters, even old deposit slips still scattered across counters, their ink faded but legible. Velma paused at one of the teller stations, examining a framed photograph on the wall. Look at this. It's from 1965. The bank's employees celebrating ... something. She leaned closer, then gasped. Fred, this man in the back row, is that your grandfather? Fred studied the photo. The young man in engineer's coveralls, standing awkwardly at the edge of the group, was unmistakably Edward Jones, his grandfather at perhaps 30 years old. But what caught Fred's attention was what his grandfather was holding. Blueprints. He's holding building plans, Fred said slowly. He was a civil engineer. Maybe he designed something for the bank. That would explain a large payment, Daphne observed. Construction projects, especially for banks with vault requirements, could easily cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Maybe this wasn't about counterfeiting at all. But Velma's expression remained troubled. Then why the secrecy? And why would someone fake a ghost to scare Fred about it? They continued deeper into the bank, passing through the executive offices. Here, the decay was more pronounced. Water damage had caused ceiling tiles to collapse, and plants had begun growing through cracks in the walls, creating an eerie jungle atmosphere. Shaggy jumped at every shadow. Can we talk about how this is the worst financial literacy lesson ever? Because I'm definitely learning not to invest in haunted real estate. Haunted rouses, Scooby agreed, pressing close to Shaggy's legs. Suddenly, Scooby's ears perked up. Row one's rear. He was right. From somewhere in the building came the distinct sound of a file cabinet being opened and closed, papers rustling, and low voices arguing. 2 people, at least, Velma whispered. They're in the vault area. We need to be careful. This might be who sent us those messages, but they might also be robbers. Why would robbers target an abandoned bank? Daphne asked logically. Not robbers, a new voice said from the shadows, making them all jump. Treasure hunters. An elderly woman stepped into their flashlight beams. She wore a vintage dress that looked like it belonged in the 1960s, though it was clean and well-maintained. Her eyes were sharp behind thick glasses, and she carried a leather briefcase that looked older than Fred. Who are you? Fred demanded, instinctively stepping protectively in front of his friends. Margaret Chen, the woman replied calmly. I was a junior accountant here in 1965, and I am the one who sent you those messages, Fred, because you deserve to know the truth about your grandfather before they destroy the evidence. They? Who are they? Velma asked immediately. Margaret gestured toward the vault. The descendants of the real criminals. The ones who spent 60 years getting rich off what they stole, while your grandfather took the blame. They've been quietly buying up the bank's old records, destroying evidence. But they don't know about the backup files, the ones your grandfather made sure were hidden in the vault before he died. Like, why didn't you come forward before? Shaggy asked suspiciously. 60 years is a long time to sit on a secret. Margaret's expression grew sad. Because they threatened my family. Your grandfather made me promise to wait until I was the last one left, until I had nothing more to lose. I'm 87 years old now, Fred. Everyone I loved is gone. But the truth? The truth should never die. She opened her briefcase, pulling out a yellowed envelope sealed with wax. Your grandfather left this for you, well, for his descendants. He knew someday someone might come looking for answers. Fred took the envelope with shaking hands. The wax seal bore his grandfather's initials, EJ, but before he could open it, a new voice boomed through the bank's old public address system, a voice using electronic distortion, but still audible. How touching. The old woman finally broke her silence. It doesn't matter. The evidence burns tonight, and the Jones name burns with IT. Smoke began pouring from the vent's real smoke, carrying the acrid smell of burning paper. They're destroying the vault records, Margaret cried out. We have to stop them. Velma immediately sprang into action. Daphne, find fire extinguishers. Shaggy, Scooby search for alternate ways into the vault. Fred, keep that letter safe. Margaret, come with me. I need you to identify which records are most important. But the smoke, Fred started, is mostly theatrical, Velma said confidently. That smell is paper burning, yes, but there's also smoke machine fluid. They're trying to scare us out, which means we're close to something they don't want us to find. As they split up, the ghostly banker reappeared, more terrifying than before. Its jaw unhinged impossibly wide, releasing a wail that sounded like 1,000 cash registers ringing in discordant harmony. It pointed directly at Fred, and suddenly the floor beneath him began to crack. Fred! Daphne screamed as a section of old flooring gave way, sending Fred tumbling into darkness below. Scooby didn't hesitate. R.R.E.D. He leaped into the hole after Fred, followed immediately by Shaggy. Zoinks. I can't believe I'm doing this. And then Velma and Daphne. They landed in what appeared to be a sub-basement, an area not shown on any of the bank's official floor plans. And what they found there would change everything they thought they knew about Edward Jones and the mystery of the counterfeit fortune. The underground room was filled with printing equipment, but not the kind used for counterfeiting. These were lithographic presses for creating architectural blueprints. And covering the walls were detailed plans, not for buildings, but for something far more interesting. A complete redesign of the American banking security system. Oh my, Velma breathed, her flashlight illuminating a wall-sized schematic labeled Project Counterfeit Eagle, Anti-Forgery Currency Design System. E. Jones, Chief Engineer.
Margaret Chen descended the ladder after them, moving with surprising agility for her age. "Now you understand," she said quietly. "Your grandfather wasn't a counterfeiter, Fred. He was hired by the Treasury Department to design a new currency system, one that would make counterfeiting impossible. Project Counterfeit Eagle wasn't about making fake money. It was about stopping others from doing so." "Then why was it kept secret?" Daphne asked. "Because it worked too well," Margaret explained. "The system your grandfather designed was so sophisticated that it would have forced banks to replace all their equipment, train new staff, and update security procedures. The banking industry lobbied against it, said it was too expensive, too disruptive. The project was buried, and your grandfather was paid to stay silent about it." Velma was already photographing every document with her phone, her mind racing. "This is incredible. He was paid not for committing a crime, but for inventing something so valuable that powerful people wanted it suppressed. This happens in economics all the time. Breakthrough innovations that threaten established industries get bought out and buried. It's called disruptive technology suppression. But if the project was buried, Lee, why fake a ghost? Why try to destroy the evidence now?" Fred asked, still stunned by these revelations. Margaret's expression darkened. "Because someone recently discovered that your grandfather's anti-counterfeiting system was an LSO, a perfect guide for how to counterfeit money. The very security measures he designed to stop forgery would, in the wrong hands, teach modern criminals exactly what to fake. And now someone is trying to steal those plans, someone who knows they're worth billions on the black market. Above them, footsteps echoed in the main bank. Heavy footsteps. Multiple people. "They're here for the plans," Margaret whispered urgently. "We have to protect them, or—" The lights suddenly blazed on, temporarily blinding them. When their eyes adjusted, they found themselves surrounded by 5 figures wearing vintage banker masks, but holding very modern weapons, cameras, recording equipment, and what looked like sophisticated document scanning devices. "How considerate," said the leader, his voice no longer electronically disguised. "You found the treasure for us. Now step aside, and perhaps you'll live to tell this tale. Who were these masked intruders? And could the gang protect Edward Jones's legacy before it fell into criminal hands?" The situation was dire. 5 masked figures blocked the only ladder exit from the sub-basement, and Shaggy's attempt to find an alternative escape route had ended with him stumbling into a wall, confirming there were no secret passages this time. "I can't believe I'm saying this," Shaggy whispered, "but I actually wish there was a secret passage. That's how bad this is." "Very rad," Scooby whimpered in agreement. But Fred's mind was already working. Years of building traps had taught him to assess any environment for tactical advantages. His eyes scanned the room. The old printing presses, the paper supplies, the elaborate ventilation system, the structural supports. "Velma," he whispered, "those presses, are they still functional?" Velma glanced at the equipment. "Possibly. The printing mechanisms look preserved." "Why?" "Because I have a plan," Fred said quietly. "But I need everyone to trust me. Can you make those presses start up on command?" "I think so," Velma replied, already moving subtly toward the equipment. "The electrical system is old, but the wiring looks intact." Meanwhile, Daphne had been studying the masked intruders. "Those aren't professional criminals," she murmured to Fred. "Look at their body language. They're nervous, shifting weight, checking exits. And their equipment is expensive, but mismatched, like they bought it separately instead of coming as a prepared team." "Good observation," Fred replied. "That gives us an advantage." Margaret Chen, despite her age, was remarkably calm. "Young man," she said to the masked leader, "do you even understand what you're trying to steal? These aren't just blueprints. They're a complete economic analysis of currency security. You couldn't use them without advanced manufacturing facilities worth hundreds of millions of dollars." The leader laughed harshly.
We're not going to use them, old woman. We're going to sell them. There are 3 foreign governments and at least a dozen criminal syndicates who would pay 8 figures for Edward Jones' anti-counterfeiting system. It's the Rosetta Stone of modern currency forgery. 8 figures? Shaggy perked up despite his fear. Like, that's, Velma, how much is 8 figures? $10 million minimum, Velma replied, still working her way toward the printing press controls. But selling state security secrets to foreign governments is treason. You'd be sentenced to life in federal prison, and that is assuming the criminals you reselling to do and kill you first to eliminate witnesses. One of the other masked figures, a woman, judging by her voice, spoke nervously. Marcus, maybe we should reconsider. Treason? That's heavy. I thought this was just about finding some old banking records for leverage. Shut up, the leader Marcus snapped. You want to go back to your pathetic middle management job, drowning in debt. This is our chance to never worry about money again. Velma said with sudden understanding. So this is about financial desperation, not criminal ambition. That actually makes sense. Let me guess. You discovered this secret while researching the bank's history for an unrelated reason, perhaps to develop the property? And saw it as an easy payday. Marcus's posture stiffened, confirming Velma's theory. Fred caught Velma's eye and gave a subtle nod. She nodded back she was ready. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus declared, stepping forward. You're going to help us catalog every document in this room, photograph every schematic, and then we're going to seal you all down here while we make our escape. By the time you're found, we'll be on a plane to Singapore. Singapore has an extradition treaty with the United States, Velma noted casually. Also, their penalties for financial crimes are severe. You'd be trading prison time here for caning and prison time there. Bad investment. Like she said, Shaggy added, trying to sound brave. Bad investment. Very rad. Scooby echoed, though his knees were shaking. Enough talking. Marcus raised his voice. Start cataloging, or what? Fred interrupted, his voice steady and commanding. You're clearly not violent people. You're desperate, not dangerous. There's a difference. Don't test me, Marcus warned, but there was uncertainty in his voice. I won't, Fred agreed. Instead, I'm going to show you something. Velma, now. Velma hit the power switch she'd been carefully manipulating. The ancient printing presses roared to life with a deafening clatter, dash ching dash ching dash ching dash, exactly like the sound that Ghost had been making. Simultaneously, Fred yanked a chain connected to the ventilation system, and a carefully calculated draft of air began flowing through the room. What are you? Marcus started. But Fred had already signaled to Daphne, who hit the light switches, plunging the room into darkness, except for the emergency lighting. In that moment of confusion, Shaggy and Scooby, who had been positioned near a stack of old printing supplies, pulled the supports exactly as Fred had instructed. Hundreds of reams of blank paper cascaded down, burying 3 of the masked figures in an avalanche of paper. It wouldn't hurt them, but it would take precious minutes to dig out. Go! 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 Fred shouted, grabbing Margaret and guiding her toward the ladder. The gang scrambled upward as Marcus and his remaining associate tried to follow while also helping their buried colleagues. But Fred had one more trick. As the last person up the ladder, because Fred never left a friend behind, he engaged the mechanism he'd spotted earlier, an old fire suppression system. Water began flooding the sub-basement, not enough to cause danger, but definitely enough to ruin all the sophisticated electronic equipment the thieves had brought. My camera. Marcus screamed from below. The documents are getting wet. Actually, Velma called down. Most of those documents are architectural vellum. They're water-resistant by design. But your electronics are definitely toast. That's about $50,000 in equipment ruined. See, this is why you should always assess risk before investing resources into a criminal enterprise. Poor planning leads to poor returns. Once everyone was safely in the main bank level, Daphne pulled the ladder up, effectively trapping the would-be thieves in the sub-basement until police could arrive. Shaggy was breathing hard. Like Fred, that was amazing. But how did you know the ventilation and paper stacks would work that way? I didn't for certain, Fred admitted. But I observed the room's structure and made an educated guess. It's like financial planning. You assess your resources, calculate the risks, and execute the best strategy available. Sometimes you have to make decisions without perfect information. Margaret Chen was looking at Fred with newfound respect. You have your grandfather's mind. He would be proud. Fred smiled, but then his expression turned serious. We need to call the police and secure those documents properly. But first, he held up the sealed envelope Margaret had given him earlier. I want to know what my grandfather wrote. The gang gathered around as Fred carefully broke the wax seal and pulled out a letter written in careful handwriting on engineering paper. Fred read it aloud. To my grandchildren, or perhaps great-grandchildren. If you're reading this, you've discovered the truth about Project Counterfeit Eagle. I want you to understand something important. I was offered a choice in 1965. I could take the money and stay, silent about the anti-counterfeiting system I'd designed. Or I could fight the banking industry's decision to bury it and likely lose everything, including my career and reputation. I took the money, and for 60 years, I've wondered if I made the right choice. Here's what I learned. Sometimes the right financial decision feels wrong morally, and sometimes the morally right decision is financially disastrous. The key is understanding that money is just a tool. It's neither good nor evil. What matters is what you do with it and why. I used that $250,000 to invest in education, community development, and yes, to provide security for my family. Every dollar was spent intentionally, with purpose. I never touched criminal money, never engaged in fraud, and never compromised my integrity, though others tried to make it seem that way. If you're facing a similar choice, remember, compound interest works on character just like it works on money. Small ethical decisions, made consistently over time, yield tremendous returns. Small compromises, made repeatedly, destroy everything. Make me proud. But more importantly, make yourself proud. Your grandfather, Edward Jones, engineer, and I hope, a decent man. The letter's final paragraph hit Fred particularly hard, and his voice wavered as he read it. When he finished, there was a long silence broken only by the distant sound of police sirens. Someone must have tripped a silent alarm. He was a good man, Margaret said softly, and he raised a good family. You're proof of that, Fred. That's actually really beautiful, Shaggy said, wiping his eyes. Even though I don't understand what compound interest is, it means small actions add up over time, Velma explained gently. Save $1 today at 7% interest, and in 10 years, it's worth $2. But the principle applies beyond money. Small acts of honesty, repeated daily, build a reputation worth more than any amount of wealth. Rot's reap, Scooby said thoughtfully. The police arrived within minutes, their flashing lights painting the old bank's marble facade in alternating shades of red and blue. Officer Hernandez, a sharp-eyed veteran who'd worked with Mystery Inc. before, took charge of the scene immediately. Let me get this straight, she said, reviewing her notes. You trapped 5 would-be thieves in a sub-basement that's not on any official building plans, using vintage printing equipment and a fire suppression system that should have been decommissioned 20 years ago. Technically, we used good resource management, Velma corrected. We assessed available assets, identified tactical advantages, and implemented a containment strategy with minimal risk to all parties involved. She means we got lucky, Shaggy translated. Very lucky. Scooby agreed. Officer Hernandez suppressed a smile. Well, your luck just caught the Mason Creek Property Development Group in the middle of attempting industrial espionage and theft of government classified documents. We've been investigating them for months on suspicion of fraud. Mason Creek? Daphne's eyes widened.
I know that company.
They've been buying up historic properties around Coolsville, promising restoration, then mysteriously discovering structural problems that require demolition. They replace beautiful old buildings with generic condos and strip malls.
Exactly, Officer Hernandez confirmed.
We suspected they were also searching the properties for valuables before demolition: copper pipes, vintage fixtures, anything sellable. But we couldn't prove it. This is the break we needed. 2 officers emerged from the bank, leading the 5 masked figures in handcuffs. As they passed under the streetlights, Officer Hernandez pulled off their masks one by one.
Marcus Thompson, she announced,
revealing a nervous-looking man in his 40s with thinning hair and expensive but rumpled clothes. CEO of Mason Creek Development, Jennifer Sato. The second mask came off, showing a woman who looked exhausted and frightened. Chief Financial Officer. The remaining 3 were revealed as the company's legal counsel, operations manager, and a freelance acquisitions consultant, which, Officer Hernandez explained, was code for someone who specialized in finding and exploiting legal loopholes. Marcus Thompson glared at Fred as he was led past. You just cost yourself millions, kid. That system your grandfather designed could have revolutionized security or made us all rich. Instead, it'll rot in a government warehouse. Actually, Velma interjected, unable to resist correcting him, you fundamentally misunderstood the economics. The value of Edward Jones's anti-counterfeiting system wasn't in keeping it secret, it was in implementing it. Secret knowledge is worthless unless applied. Your business model was flawed from conception. Also, Daphne added with surprising steel in her voice, you tried to destroy a man's reputation to cover up your crime. That's not just economically stupid, it's morally bankrupt. R-A-I-H. Scooby barked emphatically. Bankrupt. As the criminals were loaded into police vehicles, Officer Hernandez turned to Margaret Chun. Miss Chun, you'll need to give a full statement. The Treasury Department will also want to interview you about the classified documents. Margaret nodded. I understand. I've waited 60 years to tell this story properly. A few more hours won't hurt. But before the officers could lead her away, Margaret turned to Fred and placed a weathered hand on his shoulder. Your grandfather made me promise something else, Fred. He said when the truth finally came out, I should tell his family this. The money he received wasn't a payoff for silence. It was deferred payment for completed work. He finished the anti-counterfeiting system completely. But when the banks refused to implement it, the Treasury Department classified the entire project and paid him a consulting fee as compensation for his lost time. So he really didn't do anything wrong? Fred asked, hope flooding his voice. Not even a little bit, Margaret confirmed. He was paid for honest work, invested wisely, and built a legitimate fortune. But the classification made it look suspicious, especially to people who wanted to believe the worst. Your grandfather could have fought the rumors, but that would have required revealing classified information, which would have been actual treason. So he stayed silent and trusted that eventually the truth would emerge. She smiled warmly. He used to say, the truth is like compound interest. It grows slowly, but eventually it always pays out. Looks like he was right. Fred felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even fully realized he'd been carrying. His family's wealth was legitimate. His grandfather was a good man. Everything he'd believed about his heritage was true. Thank you, he said simply. Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for being worthy of it, Margaret replied. As the police cars drove away with the Mason Creek conspirators, Officer Hernandez returned to the gang with important information. We found something else in the sub-basement while securing the scene. There's a second vault, a smaller one, hidden behind the printing equipment. It contains something I think you'll want to see. She led them back into the bank with Shaggy and Scooby requiring significant encouragement. Like, can't you just describe it to us?
were really good at visualization. The hidden vault was indeed behind the presses, accessed through what appeared to be a solid wall, but was actually a cleverly disguised door. Edward Jones's engineering at its finest. Inside the small vault were 3 items. First, a complete set of Edward Jones's anti-counterfeiting designs, sealed in protective cases with a letter addressed to the U.S. Treasury Department. The letter, dated 1964, outlined his concerns about the banking industry's resistance to security improvements and urged the government to eventually revisit the system when the political and economic climate makes implementation feasible. Second, detailed financial records showing exactly how Edward Jones had invested his $250,000 payment, education funds for underprivileged students, seed money for small businesses in disadvantaged communities, war bonds, and conservative stock market investments. Every dollar was accounted for, every transaction documented with meticulous engineer's precision. He'd basically created what we'd now call a social impact investment fund, Velma observed, her respect for Edward Jones growing with every document she examined. He used his money to generate both financial returns and community benefits. This was extraordinarily progressive thinking for the 1960s. Like, what's social impact investing? Shaggy asked, genuinely curious. It's when you invest money in ways that make both a profit and help people, Daphne explained. For example, instead of just putting money in the stock market, you might invest in a company that provides affordable housing or clean energy. You still earn returns, but you also support causes you believe in. That's wonderful, Scooby said approvingly. The third item in the vault was the most surprising, a small college fund bond, made out to the future descendants of Edward Jones. A note attached to the bond read, "For education, because the best investment is always knowledge." E.J. Fred stared at the bond, overwhelmed. His grandfather, 60 years ago, had thought about grandchildren he would never meet and made sure they'd have resources for education. It was both incredibly practical and deeply touching. "Fred," Velma said softly, "do you understand what your grandfather did here? He created a financial legacy based not on how much wealth he accumulated, but on how much good that wealth could do. The money grew, yes, but only as a side effect of ethical investing. That's financial wisdom most people never achieve. He was teaching us," Fred realized. Even now, decades later, he's teaching us that money is just a tool. It's what you build with it that matters. Officer Hernandez smiled. "The Treasury Department will want to examine all of this, but the bond should be released to you fairly quickly. It's a personal financial instrument, not classified material." "That's a nice chunk of money, Fred. What will you do with it?" Fred didn't even have to think. "I'm going to continue what my grandfather started. Education funds, community investments, and ... He looked at his friends. "Probably some upgrades to the mystery machine. We do use it to help people, after all. That counts as social impact investing, right? Mystery machine." Scooby jumped excitedly. "Rithreteruspension. And maybe a refrigerator?" Shaggy added hopefully. "For, educational snacks?" Everyone laughed, the tension of the night finally breaking into relief. As they prepared to leave the bank, Daphne noticed something odd. What if Marcus and his group were the ones trying to steal the documents? Who created the ghost? That required serious technical expertise, projection equipment, sound systems. That LED light show, ... double quotes. Velma's eyes widened. "You're right. The ghost appeared before we even knew Marcus was involved." Which means a slow, deliberate clapping echoed through the bank's marble halls. From the shadows of the upper balcony emerged an elderly man in an impeccable suit, his silver hair gleaming in the emergency lighting. He looked down at them with an expression of bemused admiration. "Very impressive, young Fred Jones," the man said in a cultured voice tinged with a European accent.
You have your grandfather's intelligence and resourcefulness. I had hoped to acquire the anti-counterfeiting documents quietly, using the Thompson Group as my unwitting cat's paws. But you've complicated that plan considerably. Who are you? Fred demanded. The man smiled, and something about that smile made Scooby's fur stand on end. Let us just say, I represent certain international interests who would pay quite handsomely for Edward Jones's work. Marcus Thompson was a useful fool, greedy enough to take risks, but not smart enough to understand what he was really stealing. I, however, know exactly what those documents are worth. He pulled out a small device, and suddenly, the lights went out again. In the darkness, they heard the sounds of movement, Officer Hernandez shouting orders, and then silence. When the lights flickered back on, the mysterious man was gone. But on the floor where he'd been standing was a business card printed with elegant script. Victor Stanislavski, Acquisitions. And underneath, in smaller print, this game isn't over. Officer Hernandez was already on her radio, calling for backup and setting up a perimeter. But Velma picked up the business card with tweezers, examining it carefully. This is a calling card, quite literally, she observed. He's playing with us, showing off his resources and expertise. The projection equipment, the ghost effects, the sophisticated staging ... This wasn't about scaring us. It was about testing us. Testing us for what? Daphne asked. To see if we're worthy adversaries, Fred answered grimly. He just turned this into a long-term game. Zoinks, Shaggy moaned. Like, can't we play something simpler? Maybe checkers? I'm good at checkers. But despite the ominous threat, Fred felt strangely empowered. They'd protected his grandfather's legacy, caught a group of criminals, and proven that the Jones family fortune was built on integrity, not fraud. Whatever Victor Stanislavski was planning, Mystery Inc. would be ready. But what was the true value of Edward Jones's anti-counterfeiting system? And would Victor return to claim it? 3 weeks later, the gang gathered at Fred S. house for what had become a tradition after solving major mysteries. A debriefing dinner where they discussed what they de-learned and, more importantly, enjoyed. Scooby's attempts to eat everything in sight before the meal was officially served. Scooby-Doo, those hors d'oeuvres are for everyone. Fred's mother laughed as Scooby tried to sneak another mini quiche. Rory, Scooby said, though he didn't look particularly sorry. Fred's parents had taken the news about grandfather Edward remarkably well, or rather, they'd been relieved to finally know the full truth. The Treasury Department had declassified most of Edward Jones's work on Project Counterfeit Eagle, revealing it to be exactly what Margaret Chun had described, a brilliant anti-counterfeiting system that had been shelved due to industry pushback. Even better, the declassification had revealed something else. Several of Edward's security innovations had been quietly implemented in later currency designs without attribution. The watermarks, security threads, and color-shifting ink used in modern U.S. currency all trace their origins, at least partially, to Edward Jones's work. So basically, Shaggy said, chomping on a carrot stick at Velma's insistence, she was trying to improve his diet. Fred's grandpa invented the stuff that makes money hard to fake, but nobody knew about it? Precisely, Velma confirmed. And because his contributions were classified, he never received public credit. But private credit, the kind that matters to people who understand the field, that's different. I did some research. Edward Jones was considered a legend among security engineers. He's cited in dozens of classified government documents. He was a hero, Daphne added, who did the right thing even when it meant staying anonymous. That's real integrity. Fred smiled, feeling a warm sense of pride in his family heritage that no amount of money could buy. The $147,000 from the college fund bond had been deposited, and he'd already started researching scholarship programs to continue his grandfather's legacy of supporting education. But there was one mystery still unresolved. Any word on Victor Stanislavski? Fred asked Officer Hernandez, who had joined them for dinner as thanks for solving the case. She shook her head grimly. That's the problem. Victor Stanislavski doesn't exist. At least, not in any official capacity. The name is an alias, probably one of many. Interpol has a file on an international acquisitions expert who matches the description, someone who brokers deals for rare technologies, documents, and information. But he's like a ghost himself. Appears, completes a transaction, and vanishes. So he's still out there, Daphne said quietly. Yes, Officer Hernandez confirmed. But he's also more cautious now. You exposed his operation and got his cat's paw arrested. That's a significant loss for him, both financially and reputation-wise in his unusual business circles. Like, does that mean he'll come after us for revenge? Shaggy asked nervously. Roll Revengal, Scooby yelped, nearly dropping his Scooby snack. Actually, Velma interjected thoughtfully, from an economic perspective, revenge is rarely profitable. It consumes resources, time, money, energy, with no positive return on investment. Victor Stanislavski strikes me as extremely rational. He'll likely move on to other opportunities rather than fixate on a failed operation. Unless the target is valuable enough to justify the cost, Fred noted. True, Velma admitted, but with the anti-counterfeiting documents now secured by the Treasury Department and Edward Jones' work partially declassified, their black market value has dropped significantly. Victor's most logical move is to cut his losses. Officer Hernandez nodded agreement. That's our assessment too. Still, stay vigilant. People like Victor don't forget. The conversation shifted to lighter topics as dinner was served. Margaret Chen had also been invited and regaled them with stories of 1960s. Coolsville, a very different place from the modern city they knew. You know, Margaret said, sipping her wine, what impressed me most about Edward Jones wasn't his engineering genius, though he certainly had that. It was his understanding of time. He knew that some problems can't be solved immediately. Sometimes you have to plant seeds and trust that future generations will harvest the crop. That's actually a perfect metaphor for compound interest, Velma observed enthusiastically. Small investments made early, given enough time, yield enormous returns. The same principle applies to virtually everything. Knowledge, relationships, skills, reputation, they all grow exponentially if you're patient and consistent. Like, does it apply to my collection of vintage comic books? Shaggy asked. Because I've been collecting since I was 8, and Velma says they're appreciating assets. Appreciating slowly, Velma corrected with a smile. But yes, some of your rarer comics have increased significantly in value. You've accidentally been making smart investments. Hear that, Scoob? We're investors. We're investors. Scooby raised his paw for a high five. As dinner continued, Fred found himself thinking about his grandfather's letter. Compound interest works on character, just like it works on money. Small ethical decisions made consistently over time yield tremendous returns. He looked around the table at his friends. Velma, brilliant and curious. Daphne, brave and insightful. Shaggy, loyal and kind despite his cowardice. And Scooby, courageous when it truly mattered. They were his real wealth, the investment that paid dividends every single day. I want to propose something, Fred said, standing up. The college fund my grandfather left, I want to split it. Half for scholarships, like planned. But the other half? I want to invest it in Mystery Inc. Better equipment for Velma's investigations. Safety gear. Maybe even a fund for helping people we meet during our mysteries who need financial assistance. Fred, that's your inheritance, Daphne protested. No, Fred replied firmly. My inheritance is my grandfather's example. The money is just a tool to continue his work. And besides, what did he write? That the best investment is knowledge. Well, every mystery we solve, we learn something new. Every person we help, we grow a little bit.
That's compound interest I believe in. Velma's eyes were suspiciously shiny behind her glasses. That single quote's actually beautiful, Fred, and financially sound. Using capital to generate both monetary and social returns is really cool, Shaggy interrupted with surprising sincerity. Like your grandpa would be proud, Fred. Very proud. Scooby agreed. They raised their glasses. Scooby's was filled with chocolate milk in a toast to Edward Jones, to Mystery Inc., and to the principle that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the positive impact you have on the world. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Fred sat in his room examining the artifacts from their adventure. His grandfather's letter, the Treasury Department's declassification documents, Margaret Chun's business card. She'd insisted they stay in touch, and Victor Stanislavski's mysterious calling card. There was a soft knock on his door. "Come in," Fred called. His mother entered, carrying a small wooden box. "I found this while cleaning out your grandfather's things. I think you should have it." She opened the box to reveal a collection of items. Edward Jones's original engineering compass, a slide rule worn smooth with use, some old photographs, and a journal bound in leather. His personal journal, Fred's mother explained. I skimmed through it. It's mostly technical notes, but there are some entries about you, well, about his hopes for his future grandchildren. Read the entry from June 15th, 1980. That's the day you were born. Fred carefully opened the journal to the marked page. The handwriting was shaky. His grandfather had been 75 in 1980, but still legible. Today my grandson Frederick was born. I held him for just a few minutes, but in those minutes, I saw the future. Not my future, that's mostly past, but the future. The world he'll inherit, the challenges he'll face, the choices he'll make. I've been thinking about Project Counterfeit Eagle again. About the choice I made to take the money and stay silent. I still don't know if it was right, but I realize now that right and wrong aren't always clear in the moment. You do your best, make your choice, and then spend the rest of your life making that choice mean something positive. I invested the money wisely, not just in stocks and bonds, but in people, education, community. I tried to make that $250,000 count for something beyond dollars and cents. Young Frederick will face his own complicated choices someday. Money or principles, safety or adventure, comfort or challenge. I hope I've left him enough, not just financial resources, but an example of how to think through difficult decisions. The real measure of wealth isn't how much you accumulate. It's what you build, who you help, and what you leave behind when you're gone. If Frederick understands that, then I'll have left him the greatest inheritance possible, wisdom. Plus a decent investment portfolio. Wisdom is important, but compound interest helps too. Fred laughed through his tears at his grandfather's final line, so practical, so him. His mother squeezed his shoulder. He'd be proud of you, Fred, not just for clearing his name, but for understanding what he was really trying to teach. After she left, Fred added one more item to his grandfather's journal, a new entry in his own handwriting. Dear Grandpa, I understand now. It's not about the money. It never was. It's about using whatever resources you have wealth, intelligence, courage, friendship to make the world a little bit better. You taught me that through example, even though we never met. That's the magic of compound interest. Your good choices are still paying dividends 3 generations later. I promise to invest wisely, not just your money, but your example. Your proud grandson, Fred. He closed the journal, placed it carefully back in the wooden box, and smiled. Outside his window, the mystery machine sat in the driveway, ready for the next adventure. Somewhere out there, Victor Stanislavski was planning his next move. Somewhere else, people needed help solving mysteries, catching criminals, and uncovering truth. And somewhere Fred liked to think his grandfather was watching, pleased that his lessons in economics, ethics, and courage had taken root in fertile soil.
The real treasure had never been hidden in a bank vault. It had been there all along, growing quietly through the years. The compound interest of good character, wise decisions, and ethical living. And that, Fred realized, was worth more than all the money in the world.